Cabbage is a great way to keep your gut healthy. Edamame, which is high in protein, is another nutritious add-on. Try to avoid fried toppings, creamy dressings, and too much soy sauce. But for the most part, poke bowls contain lots of healthy ingredients that are good for you. One caveat though, tuna may contain mercury, and you'll definitely want to avoid raw fish if you're pregnant.
I'm Delia Gallagher in Rome, and this is CNN.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Good evening to you. I'm Richard Quest, tonight reporting from Dubai. And slightly different start to the programme. Breaking news. In just a moment or two, the Pentagon is due to hold a press conference. The Press Secretary, John Kirby, is going to give a briefing. It's an important briefing because it's been a pivotal day for the conflict in Ukraine. You'll be aware, perhaps, that Moscow has announced a dramatic shift in its strategy. Russia says it will reduce its military activity around Kyiv, the capital, and Chernihiv following peace talks with Ukrainian negotiators. Apparently, this is a good faith effort, they say, to build trust. Moscow's lead negotiator says it is not a ceasefire, however. In Europe, the markets welcomed the development. In Germany, the DAX finished the day nearly 3% higher, which is a good, strong indication. For some reason, the numbers are not being reflected on your screen there, but take it from me, all the markets were higher. And then there's Wall Street for you. So Wall Street has had a strongish day with the Nasdaq getting the best of the session, up just over 1.5% on the back of these peace talks. Now, the major averages are off their session highs. Also, oil, that's retreating, and quite substantially. A barrel of Brent is down almost 2% today, around $107 a barrel, as the tensions are appearing to ease somewhat. But of course, this is very small. I mean, it's very tentative in a sense of the news that we've been following. So the Russian troop activity in northern Ukraine that's going to be affected by this. The Russians have got close to Kyiv and they've encircled Chernihiv. You can see it on the map here. An aide to Vladimir Putin said Russia now wants to lessen the risk to Ukraine's decision makers in the capital. President Biden said he's taking a wait-and-see approach to this latest Russia offer to de-escalate.
We'll see. I don't read anything into it until I see what their actions are. We'll see if they follow through on what they're suggesting. There are negotiations that have begun today, or not begun, continued today, one in Turkey and others. I had a meeting with the heads of state of our 4 allies in NATO. There seems to be a consensus that let's just see what they have to offer.
Now, the Pentagon briefing is about to get underway. I believe John Kirby has now taken to the podium. Oren Lieberman is at the Pentagon at the moment and listening for us. But we're going to go to the Pentagon briefing to hear what he's saying.
Things in Ukraine. There's been a lot of reporting today on withdrawals and Russian decisions, and I think it's really important that we put a little bit of this into context. So first, again, we've seen that Russia has attempted now for going on a month to sell this war of theirs to its domestic audience as a, quote, liberation of the Donbass. However, the intensified rhetoric over the last year and in the lead-up to Russia's invasion demonstrated that the Kremlin's real intent was to overthrow the democratically elected government and to occupy or annex large portions of Ukraine. The posture of Russian forces around Kyiv, along much of the Black and the Azov Sea coasts, and in central and northeastern Ukraine indicates the geographic scale of this ambition. They've been attacking Ukraine, as we have been talking about now for several weeks, on multiple lines of axis. Russia's intent was to replace Ukrainian regional and national authorities and create so-called people's republics, as displayed recently in Kherson province. The rapid advance to Kyiv in the initial days of the war showed very clearly for all of us that Kyiv and the capital city was a key objective for the Russians. So we ought not be fooling, and nobody should be fooling ourselves, by the Kremlin's now recent claim that it will suddenly just reduce military attacks near Kyiv, or any reports that it's going to withdraw all its forces. Has there been some movement by some Russian units away from Kyiv in the last day or so? Yeah, we think so. Small numbers. But we believe that this is a repositioning, not a real withdrawal, and that we all should be prepared to watch for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine. It does not mean that the threat to Kyiv is over. Russia has failed in its objective of capturing Kyiv. It's failed in its objective of subjugating Ukraine. But they can still inflict massive brutality on the country, including on Kyiv. We see that even today in continued airstrikes against the capital city. Mr. Putin's goals stretch far beyond the Donbass. The Russian Ministry of Defense's recent talking points may be an effort to move the goalposts, moderating Russia's immediate goals and spinning its current lack of progress as part of what would be next steps. But it's too early to judge what additional actions the Kremlin may take. No amount of spin can mask what the world has witnessed over the past month, and that's the courage and the military prowess of Ukraine's armed forces and its people, which are proving to be more than what Russia bargained for in its unprovoked and unjustified invasion. Now, that prowess is not accidental. We've talked about that a little bit. It's partly a result of the training and the support we and other allies over the last 8 years have been given to the Ukrainian armed forces. The United States, together with our allies and partners, we're going to continue to provide that support going forward to meet their security needs as they bravely stand up to this Russian aggression. Now, I thought it was really important to kind of set the level straight there on that, because I've seen, again, lots of reporting here on these so-called withdrawals. Now, in other news, Balikatan 22 started this week. This is a long-standing annual bilateral military exercise conducted between the U.S. military and the armed forces of the Philippines. It's a key component of our alliance cooperation. The exercise features planning, operations, exchanges, and activities that increase both our nation's military capabilities to provide for the mutual defense of the Philippine archipelago. Exercise activities will occur at multiple locations throughout the Republic of the Philippines and will consist of 3 primary components: a bilateral staff exercise, joint interoperability events, and combined interoperability events, as well as humanitarian and civic assistance efforts. With more than 3,800 members of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and 5,100 U.S. service members, this will be the largest iteration of Balikatan to date. We look forward to a meaningful, productive exercise, and we're grateful for that terrific relationship that we have with the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And then last but not least, today, the final COVID-19 response teams in active duty status who are supporting 59 cities across 30 states completed their mission at the University of Utah Hospital in Salt Lake City. Since the onset of the outbreak, more than 24,000 military members in active duty status have provided support to the whole of government effort. The support included approximately 5,800 military medical providers that supported hospitals and other civilian medical facilities, more than 5,000 military medical personnel administering vaccines at federal community vaccination centers, as well as military personnel who assisted citizens when they were initially repatriated back to the U.S. in the very early days of the outbreak. In January of this year, the department activated more than 1,000 service members in support of the president's direction to mobilize additional military medical personnel. And of those service members, DoD deployed nearly 700 who supported 25 hospitals in 14 states just from January to March. The rest of these military members were on standby throughout that time period, ready to deploy at the request of FEMA if they were required. It's important to note that while the Title X COVID-19 response may have come to a close as of this morning, there are still more than 10,800 National Guard soldiers and airmen supporting COVID-19 response efforts in at least 43 states, territories, and the District of Columbia. And I also want to add that NORTHCOM remains postured as well to deploy more personnel if requested. And of course, the Secretary wants to take this opportunity to pass on his personal gratitude and that of all senior leaders at the department for the extraordinary work that the men and women of this department have done throughout the pandemic, but certainly in just the last few months to work so hard in support of civilian medical practitioners. And with that, we'll take questions. Bob.
Thank you, John. On Ukraine, when you say you are seeing small numbers of Russian troops moving, you say they're repositioning. Would that be, by small, do you mean like less than a battalion tactical group?
Yeah. I would, this is very early on, Bob, so we don't have a number estimate, but it's certainly not a significant chunk of the multiple battalion tactical groups that Russia has arrayed against Kyiv. So we can confirm that we've seen a small number start to reposition, but I'd really be reticent to get into an exact number or try to put a unit on it. It's not anywhere near a majority of what they have arrayed against Kyiv.
And when you say repositioning, can you say, I mean, are they moving like north into Belarus, or are they repositioning for what you described as potentially an offensive somewhere else?
I would say at this early stage, we see the movement more northward. But again, it's too early to tell, Bob, what the destination is, what the final purpose is, and you know where exactly these troops are going to go long term. We assess that it is likely more a repositioning to be used elsewhere in Ukraine. Where exactly, we don't know. I would just note that the Russians themselves have said, in the same breath they're saying they're withdrawing, that they are reprioritizing the Donbas area in eastern Ukraine.
So they could move there.
Again, that's a question better put to the Russian Ministry of Defense if they'll ever give you a straight answer. But again, they have said themselves that they're reprioritizing that part of Ukraine. Yeah.
You mentioned obviously that if they're redeploying, have you seen any signs that Russia's pulled back on actually sending supplies into Ukraine? Are they still basically continuing their own convoys of moving supplies, fuel, food, anything like that? Or if they stopped doing that, it is just the troops that have basically been
Again, very early stages here. They've only just recently, in the last few hours, made this proclamation. So we have seen a small number begin to move away from Kyiv. That's about the most I can give you. I don't have any information on their resupply efforts for troops that are still arrayed against Kyiv. I would remind that the Russians still have a significant majority of their assembled combat power, to include logistics and sustainment capability, available to them inside Ukraine. Yeah.
So just trying to understand something. If you're talking about a small number, do you think just what you're seeing now, or do you think there's going to be more numbers? Because you're saying they might be pulling out these forces to redeploy somewhere else. If they are small numbers, are they going to make any difference if they were redeployed? Is it the beginning of something?
It's a great question for Minister Shoigu. I don't know, Fadi. All I can tell you is what we're seeing. We're seeing a small number now that appears to be moving away from Kyiv. This on the same day that the Russians say they're withdrawing. But we're not prepared to call this a retreat or even a withdrawal. We think that what they probably have in mind is a repositioning to prioritize elsewhere.
And do they still have enough forces on the ground around Kyiv in case they decided to basically relaunch some kind of attack on the city?
Again, I'm not going to predict what the Russian military plan is here. To my answer to Bob, very, very small numbers that we've seen move at this point. They still have the vast majority of the forces that they had assembled around Kyiv are still there. As I've said before, we largely assess that they are in a defensive posture. They have several days ago stopped trying to advance on Kyiv and sort of took up defensive positions. Yeah. Carl.
Thanks, John. 3 questions, please. Can you update us on the number? Can you update us on the number of missiles? I'll just ask one at a time if that's easier.
That's actually much easier.
Yeah. What's the number of missiles that Russia's launched into Ukraine at this point?
I don't have an update on the missiles. You know, we know that they have since the beginning of this launched more than 1,000, but I don't have an exact number.
Okay. Secondly, does the Pentagon still consider Russia a near-peer competitor?
I think you can take away from what we talked about yesterday when we released the budget, and we talk about Russia as an acute threat, and that's how we're looking at Russia right now.
But that's not the same as what you've been saying. You've been saying near-peer competitors, Russia and China, and now we're hearing acute threat. So has it changed in the Pentagon's view?
We consider Russia as an acute threat based on certainly what we've been seeing happen over the last month.
Okay, and then my last question is about Ukraine's peace proposal. It seems like they envision some sort of security guarantee like Article 5 with NATO, with a country like Poland or Turkey or Canada. So my question is, does the Pentagon think that's feasible? Because these are NATO countries, and establishing some sort of collective defense with the NATO country would essentially bring in all of NATO with this. So does the Pentagon find a proposal like that feasible?
I think we're not going to get ahead of where Ukraine and Russia are on their discussions. This has got to be a negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, and we're certainly not going to get in the middle of that or get ahead of where that is right now. I would just say a couple of things, Carla. One, Russia should negotiate in good faith. They have an opportunity here, an opportunity that they have missed many, many times over the last month to end this war and to do it responsibly and to negotiate in good faith. So we hope that they'll do that. But the war could end today if Mr. Putin did the right thing and actually did withdraw all his forces from Ukraine and respect Ukrainian sovereignty. And again, as for what that settlement looks like, that's really between Russia and Ukraine. We wouldn't dictate the terms, and we wouldn't want to get ahead of that process. Let me go back over here, David.
As I understand,
so there we have John Kirby, the Pentagon press secretary, giving a briefing on the latest position. An important day, as you're well aware, because it's the day that Russia says that it is no longer targeting in the same way, with the same ferocity, Kyiv, the capital, and the other city, Kharkiv. Now, what John Kirby said is that the US and the partners have seen some movement, some small movement of troops away from Kyiv by Russia, but he questions whether that is a repositioning, not a withdrawal, and he says nobody should be fooling themselves about this, that the Russians could just be spinning the lack of progress. All of this at the same time as Russia and Ukraine are holding talks which have now come to a daily conclusion in Istanbul. CNN's Ben Wiedemann's with me from Mykolaiv in Ukraine. Ben, I'm not sure that you could hear much of what John Kirby was saying, but the gist of it is that there is movement which, A, suggests negotiations have made progress, and B, this idea that Russia is withdrawing, pulling back, whatever we say, a small number of troops.
Yeah, as far as progress made in the negotiations that took place in Turkey today, I think we'll just have to wait and see what comes out of it. Certainly the atmospherics were somewhat better than previous rounds of negotiations. As far as this question of possible redeployment of Russian troops to elsewhere in Ukraine with what appears to be at least some sort of pullback by their forces around Kyiv, it's hard to say. I mean, if you just look at the map of Ukraine and you look at the areas where Russian forces are located, for instance, if they even want to go to Donbass, that is hundreds of kilometers away. So logistically, in terms of ground forces, it would be quite an effort if they were to take the concentration of forces around the Ukrainian capital, move them to Donbass, or perhaps to where we are, Mykolaiv, which just not long ago was a hot front in this war. They could, on the other hand, in terms of air assets, in terms of air power, in terms of drones, in terms of missiles, that could be more easily focused on other areas. But it's so early at this moment. It's only today we're hearing about this talk of a drastic reduction of Russian forces around Kyiv. Richard?
And Ben, what everybody says, and certainly Zelensky has said on numerous occasions, that the Ukrainians and partners need to guard against Russia creating a breathing space to regroup. Now, that would be the ultimate, if you like, bad faith. But then President Putin did, on numerous occasions, say he had no intention of invading, right up until, even to President Macron, right up until the night he did it.
Yes, and in fact, nobody, certainly not here in Ukraine, has any confidence in the good faith of the Russian leader. They've seen it in the lead up to this war in terms of pronouncement that it's only an exercise on the border, that we have 150,000 plus troops there, and has repeated statements that he had no intention to go to war with Ukraine. But of course, today, here we are, I think 34 days into this war, and the clarity of his dishonesty, if you want to put it that way, is clear, particularly to people in Ukraine. Now, for instance, here in Mykolaiv, just within the last 45 minutes, we've been hearing what sounds like some very heavy bombardment of this city's suburbs, or at least the outskirts. And so whatever small gestures, perhaps statements coming out of Moscow that might point in the direction of de-escalation, on the ground, it doesn't really feel like there's any de-escalation on the cards. Richard?
Ben Wiedemann, I like the turn of your phrase, the clarity of his dishonesty. Thank you, sir. Question Means Business tonight. We're in Dubai. The head of the IMF tells me Russia's invasion of Ukraine is costing it dearly. Kristalina Georgieva also on how much damage has been done to the country. Good luck.
There were those who said it was a dream. And yet independence made the dream come true. Today, in the biggest delta on Earth, one of the fastest growing GDPs is a reality. Because here, medicine, food and garments for the world are made. For the year of the Golden Jubilee celebration of independence, the dream has never been more real. Because dreams are made in Bangladesh.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the world with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
Glorious evening here in Dubai, 21 degrees Celsius, although some of my colleagues here in Dubai are claiming that that's a bit chilly, a bit cold. I'm sure my colleagues in New York, where it's -4, would not agree with them. The head of the International Monetary Fund says the war in Ukraine has caused huge damage to the Russian and Ukrainian economies. I spoke to Kristalina Georgieva about what it means for global growth at the World Government Summit being held here in Dubai.
The world economy is still recovering from the COVID-induced pandemic. So we start from a weaker point. We were hoping for the world to grow more, and to suppress inflation. We got, Richard, the exact opposite. Growth down, inflation up. The war in Ukraine is devastating for Ukraine. It would shrink probably about 1/3. It is very bad for Russia. Russia is going to be in deep recession this year, but it also spills over to the rest of the world. It goes far, it goes fast.
You can move very fast when you want to.
Yes.
Ukraine,
and we do.
Ukraine is a good example of this. So as you now look to the next 12 months, what's your priority?
Number one priority, to clearly identify countries at highest risk and be ready for them. We have created, virtually on the first day when the war started, a crisis room at the fund to do exactly that. Be ahead of the curve and be able to act swiftly for countries that need us.
And your home country?
Well, my home country is highly dependent on imports of primarily gas from Russia. Inflation has started climbing. It is now 7%. People are anxious, and they're actually more anxious about the risk of a war spilling than anything else. My granddaughter, 11, she calls me and asks me to explain to her why are children dying in Ukraine, why there is a war. So again, for many of us in Europe, a war is an unthinkable event, but it happened.
Are you the right person in the right job at the right time, specifically because you come from Central and Eastern Europe? You have a background, you remember communism, you grew up in that, in that era. Are you the right person in the sense that you have an understanding?
Richard, I feel very uncomfortable to praise myself for anything, but the answer is yes. And let me tell you why. In the mid-90s, I lived through hyperinflation in Bulgaria. My mother's savings evaporated in 48 hours. And I had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to queue for milk for my daughter. I know the pain people are experiencing now in countries where food is becoming scarce and too expensive to buy.
Yeah, Managing Director of the IMF talking to me earlier today here in Dubai. The programme's coming to you tonight from Expo 2020. It's the last day, by the way, of Expo tomorrow. After the break, we'll be in Israel for the breaking news, where at least it's now believed 4 people have been killed in a shooting. The details coming up.
I'm David Miliband, President and CEO of the International Rescue Committee. The IRC is a non-profit organisation that helps people whose lives are shattered by conflict and disaster. The emergency in Ukraine is the worst humanitarian crisis that Europe has seen since the Second World War. The IRC is on the ground in Ukraine and in Europe, supporting people on the run from the fighting. But we need your help to help them. Visit rescue.org to donate and learn more about our work.
My advice to young people, it's quite interesting that it may look contrarian. I say longevity or experience is what drives your enterprise. Yeah, sometimes when I speak to young people, they say, I want to come in today and become the largest business or the largest bank in our market. I haven't seen that happen in the last 2 decades, and I don't think it's going to happen. Because when you look at the most successful companies in the world today, Apple or Amazon, they have taken time to build. In that time, you build experience, you build knowledge, you understand customers, you build churn. That's what drives business. I think the short-term ambition of make it today at all costs is a very short-term ambition. And because our young people today will live a long life because of health advancements, they have 100 years to live, then they're going to build for the future today.
Erin Burnett out front on CNN.
To Israel now, and breaking news. 5 people have been killed in a shooting near Tel Aviv. The police say at least one assailant used an assault rifle against civilians in several locations. Now, according to media, is reporting that there may have been several attackers and they may have been on motorcycles. Our correspondent in Jerusalem is Hadass Gold. She joins me now. What more do we know?
So what we know is that this attack took place in Bnei Brak. It's a mostly ultra-Orthodox city just east of Tel Aviv, essentially a suburb of the greater Tel Aviv area. This attack started just about 2.5 hours ago, around 8 p.m. local, when at least one assailant, perhaps more, began shooting at people along the street, civilians along the street in the Bnei Brak area. We understand that there were several locations where these shootings took place. We know 5 people, we understand 5 civilians were killed. Police say that at least one of the attackers, if there are multiple attackers, used an assault rifle before he himself was killed by police forces. The mayor of the city of Bnei Brak has asked people to stay inside their homes because there is concern that there could be further accomplices or attackers out and about. So Israeli police and authorities are asking people to please stay within their homes. Naftali Bennett, the prime minister, issued a statement saying that Israel is facing a wave of murderous Arab terrorism, that his heart goes out to the families who lost their loved ones, that he says the security forces are working, that they will fight terror with perseverance, stubbornness, and an iron fist. They will not move us from here. Now, why is he saying it's a wave? Because this is the 3rd such attack in Israel in the past week. Now, these attacks have been taking place in Israeli cities that are not normally sort of hot spots of violence, like perhaps in Jerusalem, where we are now. On Sunday, 2 assailants killed 2 and wounded 6 others in Hadera, which is a city north of Tel Aviv. And last Tuesday, a man stabbed and ran over people in Beersheba, killing 4. Now, those last 2 attacks were done by people who were affiliated with ISIS. ISIS has not claimed responsibility for an attack in Israel since June of 2017. So this is very concerning. We do not know yet whether the person who carried out these attacks in Bnei Brak is affiliated with ISIS or any sort of other organizations. We do know that Palestinian militant organizations have praised the attack in Bnei Brak. Hamas called it heroic, but there is concern about the rising levels of violence. Of course, these attacks in the last week leaving at least 11 Israelis dead just in a week. But also there have been stabbing attacks in Jerusalem in the past month. There's also been rising tension in the West Bank as Israeli forces have killed Palestinians there. And keep in mind, Richard, that in just the next few weeks, the holidays of Ramadan, Passover, and Easter are all coinciding, something that does not happen every year. So there's a lot of concern that the tensions will just completely boil over. Richard.
Hadass, who's in Jerusalem this evening, thank you. And our top story tonight, when the foreign ministers of Russia and Ukraine met earlier this month in Turkey, the talks went nowhere. Now, after negotiators spoke today in Istanbul, they expressed some optimism. Mainly, they said, here's what's on the table. Security guarantees for Ukraine, possibly backed by 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. Protected and permanent neutrality on the part of Ukraine. Kyiv would give up on NATO membership and seek fast-track entry to the European Union, as, if you like, swap NATO for EU. Halina Yanchenko is a Ukrainian member of parliament and secretary of the National Investment Council of Ukraine, and joins me now. So when you listen, well, first of all, what do you make? Let's go through the most pressing idea. What do you make of this story tonight that Russia says it's going to ease off, if you will, the attacks on Kyiv and other places and withdraw its troops?
Hello. Well, one thing you should remember is that you should not be fooled by what Russians are saying. These negotiations were nothing until they will be implemented. And actually, we've been witnessing that Russians did not follow their previous negotiations. 3 weeks ago, we negotiated we will have humanitarian corridors to let people, civilian people, mainly women with their children, out of the cities under shelling. Mariupol is a well-known example, but another 2 dozens of cities were in the same situations. And do you know what Russians did after they negotiated humanitarian corridors? They were shooting women and children dead. Women and children who were moving through this humanitarian corridor. So Russians are liars. They don't understand any negotiations, any diplomatic language. The only thing they understand is the language of force. And in this regard, I should tell you that Ukrainian army, Ukrainian president, territory defense are fighting back severely. They are real heroes. But the real heroes cannot fight, you know, massive aviation and massive missiles attacks with few javelins. And in this regard, I should tell you that personally, I am very disappointed with American politics and with this kind of help that Joe Biden provides to Ukraine. I should tell you, and this is really important, I really want you to know that the types of weapon that US provides to Ukraine did not change the time before large-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine and nowadays. However, we need a much more serious weapon. We need jets, we need tanks, we need air defense, and we need much more ammunition because it's not going to work like that.
So
and
I hear you.
The thing is that
well,
if we would receive all the ammunition we needed in the first week, the war would already be stopped. But we did not receive that help from US. Moreover, I should tell you that a number of countries in the world are ready to provide Ukraine with more weapons, but they are waiting for what US
Helena, I'm going to interrupt you, please. I'm going to interrupt you because I hear what you say. I hear what you say, and you're making valid points. But we need to talk about the other issues which are on the table this evening, which is what are those parts of a negotiation? Everybody says that this will only be ultimately resolved through unpalatable negotiation. So what will people like yourself accept as part of an agreed ceasefire?
The only thing that we accept is for Russian army to put their weapon down, leave our country, take all their weapon and all their tanks and aviation out of our country, and give, return us the territory that they occupied. As of now, they occupied not only, part of Lugansk and Donetsk region, as well as Crimea, but they occupied some other cities. You don't imagine what is going on in occupied cities. Russian soldiers are raping Ukrainian women in front of their children. They are robbing apartments. They are robbing stores. They are real murders. They commit massive executions. And again, all this happens because America did not provide enough ammunition on time. It's 34th day of war, and we are still not getting the ammunition we need from US and from number of other countries. And this is not acceptable. So I want to address to all American citizens who are watching us now. Please take your phones, take your laptops right now. write a message, write a letter to your senator, write a letter to Joe Biden, and tell them that you are not happy with the fact that Russian occupants, Russian soldiers are killing Ukrainian children, are raping Ukrainian women, and are shooting Ukrainian citizens. Ask them, ask your politicians.
I hear what you say.
To provide jets.
I hear your message. We're going to leave it there because I do hear what Halina is saying, and these are extremely important points that she is making, and no disrespect is meant by saying that to you. But Halina, we did need to talk about the issues of the negotiation, and to be fair, you had made the point several times on the question of the US and your views on the provision of armaments before the war took place. So I'm grateful that you joined us tonight. You did get the point across in detail, and you did urge US viewers to write to senators and congressmen to put further pressure on. Thank you for joining us on Quest Means Business. The question of Western leaders and the skepticism that Russia will reduce its attack on Kyiv. We'll talk about President Biden's call with European leaders and Russia's latest comments in just a moment. This is Quest Means Business. Good evening to you.
When you follow a story, you may be asked to take risks and sometimes go down a path that's not marked.
Where Iraqi troops would pre-position and these Americans would advise them.
These protests are a test for Hamas.
Any understanding between Israel and Gaza could quickly fall apart again.
The protesters are just outside a military base. They're throwing rocks and security forces firing tear gas.
When you dare to take risks, you witness passion and persistence.
And they just want to get their past be processed so they can get out of this facility.
And that's where change happens.
The one thing they have in common is a determination to keep going.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning at the University of Dayton.
How is everyone? What we're going to do this morning.
Tony Talbot is teaching a class about slavery.
There's over 40 million human trafficking victims in the world today.
But his students aren't just learning the facts about human trafficking. They're being trained to teach others about it, students who are even younger than they are.
We get the students to become near-peer educators, going into classrooms, giving human trafficking awareness presentations. If we tell children about this now, they can become part of the solution.
Hi guys, my name is Ami. I'm a second-year student at the University of Dayton.
Today, Talbot students are taking over Nick Pent's 9th grade American history class at the Dayton Regional STEM School.
It's definitely important to know what is trafficking, because maybe you're in that situation and you don't even know that you're being trafficked.
A lot more online trafficking is happening. I didn't really realize that before, but now that we do, you can obviously use more precautions when you're online.
I'm hoping that my students, now that they're knowledgeable, hopefully they get a little bit passionate about it, become leaders. I'm telling you, you just got to step aside and let the next generation do its thing.
Thank you.
Quest Means Business. The US and its European allies are skeptical of Russia's claim that it will scale down its assault on Kyiv and a nearby city. President Biden held a call this morning with his counterparts in France, Germany, Italy, and the UK. He said afterwards, we'll see if Russia follows through on its pledge. And the leaders agreed to keep in raising the economic costs to Russia for its aggression. They also pledged to keep helping Ukraine defend itself. The Biden administration itself has proposed new major military support packages. The White House budget proposal seeks almost $7 billion for defense in Europe. The money will be used to, in their words, counter Russian aggression to support Ukraine. Joining me now is Heather Bushy, a member of the White House's Council of Economic Advisors. Good to see you, ma'am. Thank you for joining us. It's a really difficult budget now, isn't it? Because on the one hand, there's all the domestic priorities. Hence, we have the billionaire tax and we have this extraordinarily large budget. But at the same time, you have the war to pay for and the help and assistance given to Ukraine, without at the same time blowing through the deficit. It can't really be done. What gives?
Well, certainly, the president has put forward a budget that focuses on building on the success domestically in the past year of strengthening the economy and bringing the unemployment rate back down and seeing historic growth here in the United States, 5.7% over the past year, faster growth than any time than in 40 years. Building on that and the success of that growth in bringing down the deficit, this budget aims to continue to make those investments that are so needed to keep the economy going, while being fiscally responsible and making this historic investments in defense, both here and abroad.
The billionaire tax, you'll forgive the colloquialism, but that's what we all know it as now. The billionaire tax, the consensus is it stands almost no chance. And so I wonder where the hope is for that level of compromise.
Well, one of the things that is popular among the American people is a tax system that is fair and that rewards work and not wealth. And that's, the reasons behind why the president has put forward this robust minimum tax on billionaires. It would tax the very richest among us, those with wealth greater than $100 million a year. And it would make sure that they pay a fair tax. In research that we did here at the White House, we found that the richest Americans paid an average of only 8% of their income in taxes over the past decade. This would make sure that they pay a 20% minimum tax. Now, I'm not saying that this will be easy, but it is certainly something that polls show the American people want, and is really important to making sure that we have the revenue we need to make those investments that the American people need to keep our economy going.
The economic environment, I was discussing it today here in Dubai with the head of the IMF, and there's no question the difficulty that faces. Now, the Fed says it could raise rates up to 6 times this year. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask if that's the right decision. I can hear your answer telling me that they're independent, so we won't go down that road. But I've saved you the time on that. But the difficulty of avoiding stagflation in the economy at the moment seems to be fairly real.
Well, here's the thing. We are starting from a strong place in terms of the labor market. Again, we have the unemployment rate back down to 3.8%, so that's a strong foundation from which to move forward in the economy. Certainly, we continue to see these challenges. We've spent a lot of time this year working on fixing America's supply chains. And there's money in the budget that the president just announced for making sure that we're enforcing the laws on the books to ensure fair competition. More money for folks at the Department of Justice, more money for folks at the Federal Trade Commission to make sure that the prices people pay are fair. So those are some of the tactics that the president has taken to keep prices down. But these investments can help to make sure that while the Fed is doing its job in keeping an eye on inflation generally, that the president and Congress are doing their job to make sure that we're making those investments that can lower direct costs for families and everything from prescription drugs to child care, and making sure that we're keeping this recovery on track.
Heather, it's the first time that I think you and I have had a chance to speak on Quest Means Business. I most certainly hope it won't be the last. I'm grateful you've joined us tonight from Washington, D.C. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we continue tonight, Quest Means Business, we'll have a market update, show you how the market's trading towards the end of the day. It's been very bullish during the course of the week. All that to come.
Cesar de Trey, a manufacturer of gold dentures in England, traveled to India, then part of the British Empire, in 1930 to sell his wares to officers in the British Army. Many of the officers he met complained about their wristwatches getting smashed during polo matches. Back in Europe, Dutré hooked up with two watchmakers, Lecoutre and Edwin Jaeger, and an engineer named Alfred Chavot, and the four of them devised the Reverso. Now, the unique feature of the Reverso is that the case slides and flips over, so the glass part of the watch, the crystal, is not exposed. What is exposed is a solid metal back, which can withstand any bumps and smashes during a polo match or any other sport.
A new audit says the EU must do more to protect itself against cyber threats after a sharp rise in attacks. Of course, Ukraine's internet provider has also said it suffered a powerful cyber attack at the hands of Russian forces, it's believed. It's the second major such attack on a Ukrainian telecom since the invasion began. In doing so, it took out 87% of the operating capacity. It gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Robert Herjavec is an investor on the Shark Tank and the CEO of the global cybersecurity firm Herjavec Group. He joins me now. It is good to see you, sir. The problem with these cyber attacks is the invidious way in which you don't really know you've been attacked, unlike a missile, until it happens, and you can't work out the ramifications or even when it's over.
Richard, it's a great point. You know, the average breach, the intruder was inside the network for anywhere from 8 to 10 months. So I think President Biden did everybody great service across the world by highlighting how important a threat this is. You know, people tend to forget about cybersecurity when the tanks start rolling. But Russia is not going to go quietly into the night. To your point, we've seen attacks on infrastructure, and we're seeing continued attacks.
Robert, what do we do? Since at the end of the day, let's be grown-ups about this. We are doing it to them, whatever sort of it might be. They are doing it to us. The Chinese do it to the Americans, and so on and so on. So what are we supposed to do to either protect ourselves or defend ourselves or attack?
Well, Richard, this is the new normal or the new Cold War, if you will. By the way, a lot of people may not know that 52% of all attacks, even before this, were instigated from Russia. So this is not new. We talk about China a lot and other areas.